All right, everyone. In the wake of Cernovich and Loomer and some of those others getting kicked off Medium.com, like I guess they were writing stuff that's too edgy, so they have to be censored. It's important. Baked Alaska getting a strike. He can no longer stream for the next 3 months on YouTube. He has a backup channel for streams. But I mean, by the way, some people thought that was the reason I was announcing the possibility I would create a second channel for live content. It's actually because I want to have sort of a live show, but I want it separate from my standalone content. The standalone content, it all gets mixed together. Occultism, books, whatever it happens to be, politics, news. Now, I wanted something that was solely about just general live banter. Not blood sports, but like I could talk to people there, not interviews. The interviews would be on this channel. But having one just for a regular, weekly or bi-weekly live show, I think it would be fun. And I could read off Q&A style stuff from the comments. Now that I know slow mode exists, I could actually do that. Now I could put it up to 120 seconds or something and it'd be pretty good. But I would like to tell people something. They need to know this. Internet personas are the new scapegoat for society. And what I mean by that is this. It's beginning to look an awful lot like people who are online are simply the exact counterparts of maybe countercultural religious movements in the 1980s. Countercultural political dissidents in the 60s or in the 2000s within the realm of that, really. Rap, MTV, things, Survivor, things of that nature, which is like hilarious. We have become, I think, the cool kids of the generation, but it's not like before. With technological paradigm changes before, it was always easily centralized. That is, those with the money and the power were the ones that were responsible for producing the content. Like, you couldn't simply have an album pressed, you had to pay for it. And without a marketing campaign, unless you were singing the right notes, so to speak, you weren't actually going to get much airplay. It was very, very uncommon that a person, even who was talented, unless some exec thought they were talented, some executive, unless they liked them, to actually get, produced at any significant level. You go forward to cable, yes, you have the occasional time where some group of dude bros show up at MTV's offices and jackasses spawned. Most of the time, though, it was very formulaic, very commercialized. There wasn't a lot of edgy stuff for the most part, and still isn't. There's a reason why cable, of course, at the moment is dying. Radio, same thing. It's the same thing within publishing. I wouldn't be the least bit surprised. Now, hear me out here. I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if one of the upcoming maneuvers of the deep state sort of establishment pro-censorship crowd is to go after people who self-publish, honestly. To do things, to try to censor them more. I remember Amazon, I think last year, banned Holocaust revisionism within its titles. It's going to go further than that. Political criticism of censorship probably will itself amusingly be censored at some point. Political manuscripts of various kinds. Anything that suggests that people have a right to defend themselves will be construed as terrorist literature or something. I wouldn't be surprised. Eventually, because of the popularity of people being able to self-publish, you see people who are labeled as far-right or bad, evil, Nazis, despicable, irredeemables. These people often self-publish, and no mainstream publisher is going to allow them to put content through. Even if they've got a big name, they're like, well, we don't want to rock the boat. We got a good thing going here. We got our nice, fluffy PG-13 or G-rated sort of material. We don't want something that politically edgy. We know people will come for us if we do. So they self-publish on like POD. Nobody at Amazon really ultimately cares unless it's encouraging violence or it's pornographic material in the most explicit, non-artistic sense, or if it's like a really, really out there commentary. Nobody cares. Eventually, they will come for the publishers because it's a way for people to make money, number one, and the establishment wants in on that. Obviously, it's a way to make money, and it's a way to change people's minds. They want to make sure to get in on it so they can shut up their critics. They're already doing that online. We are exactly like people who were labeled devil worshippers in the past. Like these labels, most of the time, don't even make sense. Oh, this person's far right. Sargon is far right. I heard earlier from one of the editors at The Hill who was responding to Baked Alaska. Essentially, the reason he got banned is Anglin and Sargon had a debate on his channel. Anglin, of course, said out their stuff. Oh no, we can't have that. That's a terrible thing. We've got to deplatform this individual who's letting this Nazi speak. Now, Sargon was labeled far right by this individual. He's like, oh, we got banned from streaming. because he allowed a Nazi to debate another far-righter for several hours. Well, that's not actually true. I mean, if you said this in the context of a Hill article, you get sued for it. I think these pundits, they like to do a little bit of extra anti-journalistic content on the side to seem edgy. Really, though, it's just a lie. I mean, Sargon's fairly obviously not on the far right, actually is antagonistic towards people who tend to be. At this point, somebody like myself, I think, would be on the margins of what he would even consider marginally tolerable, and I'm just like a libertarian and populist. So you keep that in mind. He calls himself a liberalist for a reason, to differentiate himself from people. Simply because he happens to believe in non-censorship does not make him far right. But you're going to get that anyway. What I've told people now for over a year, content creators ultimately need to stick together. Have you noticed, for example, MSNBC and CNN basically seem to coordinate and say the same thing at this point, despite the fact that they technically are competitors. They've circled the wagons. Cable at this point, the legacy media realizes, and legacy entertainment too. We see that with like Black Panther and stuff. These people have realized that their main competitor at this point are a bunch of random YouTubers and people who run Facebook pages as admins. Bloggers, groups like that, people who have independent websites. We're their enemy now. We're their main competitor. They're not mainly competing with one another. There is no single cable network they can compete with that rivals even certain small groups of individuals within the online world. A half a dozen randomly selected, decently sized YouTube channels get as much airplay as some of the smaller cable networks, and there are far fewer cable networks than there are YouTubers. You're talking several 100 million people versus a few dozen overall actual networks of any note. This is where you've got your news, the mainstream entertainment, and a bit of like pro-government state analysis, some of the foreign channels, maybe get the BBC or whatever. A few dozen cable groups and their parent firms. They have a huge amount of money, and yet they run multi-million-dollar ad campaigns, and ultimately the payback from it is number one in the red. Number two, the overall pull that it gets, the bang for their buck is so much lower than someone can get by buying a $10 webcam and starting a totally free YouTube channel. So they've got a problem. They've got a fiscal problem. It is about the money. As their audience disappears, what I warned would happen is they would continue to get more and more desperate. Number one, they'll begin backstabbing one another. We've already seen that. Number two, though, in general, they will work together to try to attack us. So they're going to try to convince people in society that there's a systemic problem of extremists using self-publishing, which there isn't, but I'm preemptively telling you at some point that is an argument that they will make. Oh, someone with extreme views made content, put it on Amazon. They should be banned from Amazon, even if the content, by the way, they will make this argument too, is not itself extreme. They'll essentially do what they've said before, like with Patreon, with Twitter saying, oh, we're going to start looking at people's content off of Twitter to determine whether they can use Twitter as well, because we don't want to prop up someone who is using Twitter to buff up what is essentially an extremist website or something. That's the argument they'll make. They'll go down that route. It remains to be seen. Amazon is in a ripe position, considering video hosting as well at the moment, is in a position as the largest of these firms, the most powerful, to cast itself as pro-liberty and say to hell with all of you people. They could do potentially what Google used to do and tell the NGOs to fuck themselves, and they could make money hand over fist, by the way, doing this. Because the new counterculture is taking place entirely online. They could be a huge part of that despite being a multi-billion-dollar corporation, which would be funny. These corporations, by the way, they're large enough to resist the temptation to censor. They just choose not to because they don't want to have the other tech firms potentially gang up on them at this moment. The fact that they're monopolized, the fact that they're centralized in and of themselves doesn't mean that the audience that they use to make their money is not totally decentralized. Google has a lot of money because of search involving other people's work, other people's websites. YouTube involving other people's video making. Blogspot involving other people writing stuff on blogs. And all of these other services, for the most part, it's all decentralized in where they're getting their income. Facebook has the same thing. Amazon largely has the same thing. It's vendors, self-publishing, and things of that nature that are making them the bulk of the money. The only real holdouts are like Microsoft and Apple. Developing stuff, yeah, they're selling it to people in a decentralized manner, I guess, but ultimately it's a highly centralized company with its proprietary software. It's not. A YouTube video is not the property of YouTube. You're essentially lending it to YouTube. You're saying that you can use this and you can also host this here, and maybe there's ads involved and that has its own sort of subcontractual agreements. But it's decentralized. You're the one making the content. YouTube doesn't make a lot of its own content. Blogspot doesn't itself have the heavy-hitting, hardest blog in all of the world. Internet personas, ultimately now, are the new boogeymen of culture as well. We're now the new boogeyman. We're the scapegoat. Society is going to look around and see there's violence. It must be caused by the internet. They've done this already. They did this with devil worshippers. They did this with commies. They did this with hippies, with drugs, the drug scares of certainly the 60s, even earlier with reefer madness, opium dens, men with beards, chewing tobacco, literally anything you can think of. Has been blamed as someone, used as a scapegoat. But the internet's a really, really convenient scapegoat because any opinion you can have, you will find on the internet. It's just a matter of the legacy media pretending that it's more present than it is. For instance, there are a few violent people online that say violent things. To say that there's a problem with it, though, is totally untrue. Generally speaking, people online are not violent. There's a subsection of the general population of the world, bit younger than the world population as a total, bit more first world, a bit more tech literate maybe even a bit more libertarian, which could save our asses in the future. But generally speaking, a random sampling. And that's really the truth. But if you are talking to people who are watching cable, whose average age is somewhere in the mid to late 60s, there's a good chance that a lot of those people don't realize that. And as for politicians, they're too lazy to look into such issues, and they tend towards wanting authoritarianism because they happen to have positions of authority. It's just a power corrupts situation. The big tech firms, despite the fact that they know better, are more than willing to go along with NGOs that threaten to turn around and defame them because they don't want the hassle. YouTube held out and said, well, we're not too keen on the censorship thing. The NGO said, ah ha ha, and then obviously they went off to talk to their corporate sponsors so that they would threaten to drop their ad campaigns. That's probably what happened. CNN has now openly done this. They even admit to it openly. Yeah, we told YouTube that InfoWars has like other videos that they might want to strike down. Ha ha ha. You are directly, I predicted this as well, that they would more directly attack competitors in the future. It wouldn't just be from the shadows. Some agent provocateur is hired to go dig up dirt. Some person is hired to go and look at YouTube videos to see if there's any weird content there. That's happening too, but it's obviously not working enough, so they're going into a next step, and they'll continue. Thankfully, though, they're exhausting so much of their political and social capital in attacking people whose audiences often number in the hundreds of thousands, millions, sometimes larger. They're exhausting so much of their capital, especially with the under 50 generations, that they're going to collapse their own efforts. At some point, they are going to collapse. And ultimately, despite the fact that not every political commentator, like on YouTube or wherever, likes Trump, ultimately there is something to be said for the fact that our fate is now tied to his, because you've got to understand, they look at Trump, they see unpopular, bigoted, whatever symbol of everything wrong. They try to tie him in with the new counterculture, the alt media, because it makes for a convenient straw man on a political basis. They can try to make it partisan, so they can always have part of the population at least backing them, even people who generally don't trust the cable news, who don't trust the radio or whatever. I think that this plan eventually backfires. But we're at the beginning of the end of the paradigm shift. Things will calm down. It's just a matter of how bad how many people have to have their basically careers crushed under by censorship first. How many big tech firms are going to have to cheapen their own platforms, potentially go MySpace mode because some NGO or some legacy media outlet told them it was a good idea? How small does the fan base of the legacy media have to become before people realize that it's not in their own self-interest to want online censorship? You got to understand, people are arguing right now, if they're not a politician, a multi-million-dollar corporate head, a banker, or the head of a big tech firm or NGO, one of these companies, one of these organizations usually, or corrupt individuals. It is not in any way in their best interest to argue for censorship. They're robbing themselves of interesting material and the ability to themselves make interesting material. They're also setting the groundwork. They're setting a legal precedent too. Certainly a corporate precedent. For corporations, for-profit entities, they exist only to make money to determine what is or is not appropriate to say on platforms that now encompass most human communication. Most person-to-person communication nowadays does not take place on a printing press or interpersonally. It doesn't take place on a phone. It doesn't, unless it's, again, hooked to some, like a Facebook Messenger or something. It doesn't take place on the radio. It doesn't take place as a pundit, talking to people on a cable news show. It takes place on the internet between individuals, individually or in groups. It is a terrible precedent to set. Say, oh yeah, politicians and NGOs and banks and corporations, we trust them to regulate this sort of thing. Terrible idea. Couldn't be worse. Now you'll end up with a situation way worse than cable. You'll end up with a situation way worse than terrestrial radio. Trust me. People need to be informed that the companies they're trying to task with doing the censorship, they're multi-billion-dollar firms. They're run by extremely rich people. Doesn't that make people on the left a little bit nervous? Maybe now neoliberals may not care. They sit there laughing. They'll be the next target. Eventually, in due time, as the paradigm inevitably shifts, they'll be the ones bearing the brunt of it. It'd be pretty funny when it happens. The paradigm will change over. The abuse will begin to decline. It's just a matter, we can't predict when that happens. I've said maybe a year, 2 years, but I'm not sure about that. It could be 5. It could very well be. We can hope that it gets better soon, because quite clearly, when you're pissing people off, you have a channel on YouTube, 500,000 fans or whatever. You're angering at least tens of thousands of core fans of theirs and making your platform less palatable to them. You're giving them a reason to use other people's services. I don't even understand at this point how, fiscally speaking, big tech firms can even justify the practice. I would think that fiscally it makes no sense. It would make more sense for them to coordinate together to the extent of forming a confederation against censorship and saying, no, we're not going to go after one another for not censoring. We're all going to adopt similar TOS. They're going to be very liberty-loving. We're US firms. They would make more money, I think, with that. Certainly long-term they'd make more money. They're making the same mistake that old centralized technologies typically make. Terrestrial radio made this mistake. They were blown out of the water by satellite radio. Mainstream cable made the same mistake. They didn't get on the on-demand train early enough. They got plowed under by it. A lot more people use Netflix at this point. Single company. More people use Netflix than give a shit about the basic cable sort of stuff. A lot of people, I believe in polling, more than half of Gen Z doesn't even watch TV. I think, by the way, that's a great thing for the world. It's like, yeah, the internet's interactive, and hopefully some of that time you're, going outside or something. They say they're more conservative. Maybe they're going to take up, a lumberjack trade or something. That'd be good. It'd be good for the overall health of the country. But keep in mind, internet personas are now the scapegoat for society. You have to be careful what you say, because it can and will be used against you if it's possible for them to construe it. They will lie about us. They'll escape legal repercussions through their various slimy methods in doing so. They will lean on tech firms to try to limit our capabilities while propping theirs up, so that they have priority status. They can show war footage, not get banned, but you can't show, your paper cut, or else it's too gory for the YouTube platform. That's essentially what they want. They want to prevent us from saying edgy stuff, but they want to be able to cover edgy stuff. They want to be able to interview Anglin. They want to be able to interview him without getting a strike on YouTube, but if you do it, it's a problem. It's a problem because, you don't have a 7-figure salary and cap teeth. There's the problem, because you're not making money for them. I think they lose, but we got to be aware. It's going to be some time before they lose enough of their support to be totally defanged. That's about all. Peace out.